Hello, everyone. Um, Once again, we're here at DragonCon doing our virtual panels. Um, the the topic today is going to be one that I've done. I've done numerous panels on this over the past several years, and obviously, it's constantly evolving and updating. And that is breaking into comics the digital way. So I'm just going to give just a moment. If you are watching this later, I'm just going to give a moment for a few people to come in before I get started. Um, but yeah, just this is something that I get probably the number one question I get is how can I break into comics? So this is going to be a bit of a tutorial on the ways people can break in. So hopefully you'll find this informational. So I'm just going to dive in. If you come in late, don't worry, you can replay this later. Also, before I get too far into this, I'm also going to post for everyone here. This is tied to an event, the DragonCon event, and we do have a virtual booth. Many of you may have already seen it. Today is the last day for this virtual booth. So while everyone filters in, I'm going to share that link down here in the bottom. So you can feel free to check that out. But now, without much further ado, I will begin. We're going to be talking today about breaking into comics the digital way. It's quite interesting that we have the opportunities that we have. Breaking into comics today is something that is a lot easier. It's more accessible and much more fair. You're no longer determined by a lot of the factors that would hold up the ability to get access to talent anywhere across the globe. So hopefully you'll find this informative, and it is something that does work. First off, who the heck am I? A lot of you guys probably coming here from the White Widow, or already kind of know who I am. But this is, you might not know everything about me, but I am Benny Powell. I'm for years I was a writer at Marvel Comics. After Marvel was going through its bankruptcy back in the 90s, I went from there out into the world of marketing. And you might have heard of the companies I worked with, like IBM and Priceline. Did advertising, global advertising for IBM, and I was the head marketing writer for Priceline during its formative years. So if you ever wondered why William Shatner, now you know that there was a geek in the room. That would be me. I was also in the very, very, very early days of web comics, one of the first guys to do it. I worked with Marvel when Marvel was on AOL. There were, believe it or not, web comics on AOL. They were enjoyable. I thought the format, obviously, back whenever you're dealing with AOL, for those of you who don't know, this when you used dial-up. You literally heard the whole screeching and stuff, and I think 56K modems were the fastest you could get. So the level of graphics you could do on a webcomic were very minimalistic. From there, then broadband started to come about, and I launched a webcomic portal called benchcomics.com, which was among the first where we would conglomerate a bunch of web comics from all over, including we even hosted some from Marvel. We had Kiss, we had Happy Tree Friends, even Ace Ventura animated comic. So, but back then, making any money on web comics was not very easy, and the server costs ended up becoming onerous. So I needed to. I basically just shut it down. Other sites like KeenSpot and those came up after, and were able to make it work. And thankfully, the monetization of webcomics changed. But I then returned to webcomics back in 2010, working with KeenSpot, and created Wayward Sons Legends, which ended up reaching millions of people through it. And we had several comics that are now part of the Absolute universe. I am the publisher and editor at Absolute Comics and Red Giant, as well as being the writer and co-creator for White Widow, I Make Boys Cry, and dozens of other titles. So now I mentioned in brief that things used to be a lot different back in the day. In order to break into comics, you had very, very few avenues. You could try and mail your stuff in, but most of the time, you ended up in the circular file folder when you mailed things in. The most surefire way to get spotted or get a job were at conventions, the actual in-person ones, not the virtual ones, since that did not exist. You would take your portfolio, go in with your heart in your hand, and really kind of hope that someone would see what you were working on and be willing to give you a shot or give you a job, or at the very least give you some pointers. And since there were not as many conventions as there are now that seems like there are multiple conventions going on every week, at least hopefully in the land of post-COVID. We'll get back to that. But conventions, you'd go in, the editors for the big two were at most of the big ones, and they'd give you advice. That's actually kind of how I got started. I would go to these conventions. I got to sit down with Al Williamson and others who I was trying to break in as an inker. I figured that was probably the easiest path to break in. Al Williamson gave me pointers, would sit me down beside him and teach me what a lot of his tricks and tools and things like that. If you don't know who Al Williamson is, definitely Google. He is one of the greats. And one year, finally, I got enough courage. I did my portfolio and took it in to be reviewed by DC, and it was at DC and Marvel were both at the Dallas Fantasy Fair. This was around 91 and, oh no, sorry, 93, 94, something like that. I went there. Archie Goodwin was looking through my portfolio, and he goes, "Hey kid, this is, you got some potential. Keep at it," and gave me a bunch of pointers. And he was looking through it and goes, "So where did you get the story for this? I don't recognize the story," because he apparently reads every story from Marvel and DC and didn't recognize it. I said, "Well, I didn't have a script, so I just wrote it." And he turns to me and says, "Do you ever think maybe you're a better writer than you are an artist?" Which that's a fun, painful, backhanded compliment. But I was like, well, I don't know how to break in as a writer. I mean, the general rule, especially back then, and to a large degree even now, is that companies won't look at writing submissions. It's kind of a catch-22. How do you get noticed? How do you get seen because words and stories, there's a danger there for new properties or scripts of them have somebody else already doing that kind of an idea. And the concern is that if you do an unsolicited submission, well, then you're going to get a company would expose itself to being sued for plagiarizing or stealing or whatever. So the general rule for writers is good luck back then, and even to a large degree now. So he explained to me, he said, well, if you want to be a writer, this is the old way, remember. The method was you would get an internship at Marvel or DC and work your way up. And, if you did a good job as an intern, you get hired as an assistant editor, and you would assist an editor. And if you do a good job at that, then you become an associate editor. And once you become an associate editor, you have the ability to manage your own title or titles. And once you are doing that, you would basically do a quid pro quo and hire other editors who also want to be writers. And they in turn would hire you to write some stuff for some of their books, little fill-ins and things like that. And that's how you built it up. And eventually, if you did a good job at all of that, you could have a career as a writer. I said, well, I didn't know how to become an intern. And he said, well, I'm offering you an internship at DC. Okay. So he gave me his information. So this came from the convention path. I got the internship. I got sick that semester at school and was told that basically Oklahoma was killing me. I was allergic to the area, and I was told to move out, to some place where I wouldn't be sick. And it just so happened New York would be such a place. So I remembered the internship offer. I called up Archie, and he said, well, we don't have, this was coming up on the spring semester. We don't have a spring internship at DC, but do you like Marvel? Which, of course, I loved Marvel even more than DC. And so he said, sit by your phone. And he hooked me up and got me my internship at Marvel. I kind of broke the mold a little bit. Within my first 2 weeks, I sold my first story to Marvel, making me the only intern who ever broke in at Marvel as a writer. So that was a bit outside the norm, but still the internship path was another way. And it can continue as a path today, but other than that, you had to have connections, or you had to make your name in other media and get those connections, or you had to join the bullpen and work your way up again as a worker to try and get noticed. Or you were a hobbyist and you would do your own little ash cans and try and self-publish and get noticed that way. So the methods to becoming a writer or an artist or something were very, very slim. You kind of had to work your way up. It was very hard. The odds were stacked against you. Thankfully, things have changed. Now, just to step back for a minute, there are numerous types of creators. You've got writers, pencilers, inkers, colorists, painters, letters, and digital artists. So I'll go through that. The lines have blurred a bit. Obviously, writing is self-evident. And there are two stages of writing. You've got the plot and the script. Sometimes people do that all at once. You don't have to. But the writer, all of these steps I'll go through here in a bit more detail. Writer is typically the person who comes up with a story. Good writers collaborate often with their pencilers on things, and that's usually the best results. Pencilers are the people who lay down the base character. The inkers provide depth and shading. Inkers may or may not be a part of the process because things have changed in this digital world. I'm personally still a fan of good inks. The colorist is obviously the person who puts the color down. Now there's 2D colorist, and then there's painters. Painters, usually the difference is the black lines typically remain with a colorist, whereas if you're painting, the black lines usually are completely removed. A letterer is the person who puts the word balloons down. And then now you also have digital artists. Digital artist can literally be someone who uses 3D software, for instance, or even Flash I've seen people use, or the entire thing can literally be created in the computer. So those are the different types as they exist right now. Now, let's say you want to create your own work, because here's the thing. At the end of the day, the best way to break in is to create your own creation. There's no barrier to entry. Okay, let me say this again. There is no barrier right now to entry. And I'll get into how you can enter in a bit. But in the world of digital, the field is completely leveled. Anyone who wants to try to break in has the same opportunity as the person next to them. You don't have to go through those years-long paying your dues process of building up within a company, established company. You can make your own way. You can prove yourself. Now, you still have to have the hard work of the creation. Now, some of the best ways is to create your own series, much like how we created White Widow and all of the other books. And there are two types of creations. There's no hybrid for this. A lot of people will try and say that there's a hybrid. There really isn't. And that's either, if you're the creator, you have someone, you have a work for hire and you want to keep 100%. That means you completely own that property, like how we do, for instance, on Wayward Sons and Wayward Legends. I am the owner. I hire the artists. I get to call all the shots, but I have to have all the risks. I pay for them out of my pocket, but I'm not asking for any of the risk to my artists. My artists get paid for their work, and there's no back-end profit sharing. There's no promise that, maybe if we hit it, maybe if we get a Kickstarter, no, that's not work for hire. If there's a word maybe or if or could, a work for hire, if you are doing a work for hire type of situation where you as the creator want to own that property, then you must pay your people you are working with. So I cannot stress that enough. Their time is valuable. Do not think otherwise. The other option is to collaborate. That's where you share, and it's an equal share with your fellow creator or creators, the ownership. That means you both get to benefit, but you also both take the risks. So if you're a writer and you want to collaborate with an artist, that's whenever you can use the word maybe and if, but you both go into it knowing that you're both owners and you both take all of the risks for that something may or may not come from all your hard work. It needs to be a type of, there are numerous types of collaborations and levels, but the best ones tend to be where everyone's pulling their own weight. Maybe if you're the writer, You're also taking on doing a lot of the marketing and the networking and putting up social networks and things like that. While the artist it takes longer, let's be honest, it takes longer to do the art than it does to do the writing. Doesn't mean it's any less, but it does take less time. So, if you want to be fair, you need to also do work. I personally find it also beneficial as a writer for me to do the lettering, because if once you learn InDesign and you have your templates and things like that, which I recommend Comic Craft as a good resource, or Blambot, then you can actually do your layout of your final dialogue and make sure that it fits the way you want it to. And that also then becomes a sharing of the work. Now, you want to team up with someone, whether it's work for hire or collaboration. Where can you find people? You can work with people. Again, still, conventions are a great resource. You've also got some great resources online like DeviantArt. If you find some artists on there that you like, you can reach out to them, talk to them. Or if you are an artist, that is a great place to post. You've also got Instagram, same type of thing. There are also some other art posting resources that are now out there. You've also got Facebook forums that you can, there a large number of them, like comics creators and things like that. Just simply look on Facebook and do a search for those groups, and you ask to join, and that's a great place. You've got Reddit forums. You find people who are posting on there. Colleges. You've got a lot of local colleges if you're looking for someone a little closer for either writing or art. And another resource that I've used numerous times is digitalwebbing.com. They have a talent engine on there. It's free to use. You just post, I'm looking to collaborate, or I'm looking for work for hire. You post how much you're paying, or what kind of project you're doing, and people get connected on there. Now, I'm going to go through each of the processes a bit. You've got the writing processes. As a writer, I can tell you, for me, the most important aspect when you're writing is to outline. I know people groan when they hear outlining. This isn't for a term paper. It doesn't have to be pretty. It just has to be something that you can follow and map out. Okay. You simply think in what I do is I try and think macro down to micro. Okay. So let's say I want to look at what's the first 12 issues of this series going to be like. So I'll write a sentence for each her The first issue of White Widow, I want to introduce the character, and her parents are dead, and she's got this mystery she has to solve. Issue 2, she finds out a bit about her powers and faces her first villain. Things like that. Going through each issue, just one sentence. Then from there, when I'm working on each issue, I then do a page-by-page outline. And that really, I cannot stress how, because you've got a limited amount of real estate. If you're doing 20 to 24 pages, that's how many pages. And doing it in outline form will stop you from spinning your wheels and spending too much time on something, and then you get to the end and you have to wrap up 12 pages worth of stuff into one page. That would be terrible. So instead, you spend some time, outline, just on a sentence for each page. Now, here's a trick. I learned this from Larry Hama early on. The best stories end each page with what is called a page turner, so think of it as like a little mini cliffhanger on the end of each page. You open the door and you see someone react. Oh, I can't believe it's you. And now the reader is going to want to turn the page. Who did they see? Or some big explosion. Are they alive? It doesn't have to be necessarily that dramatic. It can be a reveal. It can be anything, but your pacing should be in the form that every page ends on a page turner. And when you think like that in your outline, your story is going to be a whole lot easier to write. Now, when it comes to your actual writing, this isn't a screenplay. You don't have to follow the final draft type of script writing process or format. There is no real rule, because ultimately this is just, your scripts are just a conversation between you, the writer, and the artist. That's it. And if you're an artist on this process and your writer is not giving you a conversation and direction, ask them to. So this is all it is. It's simply an easy conversation. Now, that being said, you can learn the movie script. For instance, INT means interior. I do like to do stuff, and I'll talk about that in a second. But you can make this an easy process. It doesn't have to be stressful. In fact, the Marvel style of doing things is to literally just give a very loose description. Sometimes a simple small paragraph can be a whole page. Spidey and the Green Goblin are fighting over the rooftops of the city, and the Green Goblin has the upper hand. That's a whole page. That's the Marvel style. The dialogue, then, the script, as they call it, they got plot and script. Those are the two terms that they use in the Marvel style. The plot is what happens. The script is the dialogue. So then when the pages come back, you would create a script where Spider-Man and you'd say panel 1, Spider-Man says, "You can't get away with this, Green Goblin." And panel 2, Green Goblin says, "Oh yeah, watch me," things like that. So you can follow that method. It's a very loose method, and it allows a lot of creativity with your artist. For the full script version, that's a bit more like a movie script. That's if the writer wants to control every aspect or get every nuance. I believe like Alan Moore, for instance, will fill up 3 pages worth of descriptions and every little aspect in his scripts for every single page. So it's a crazy amount of detail. Plus, they'll put exactly the dialogue that they want in each panel, and it'll be a panel by panel breakdown. Or you can do a hybrid, and that's kind of what I do. Is I follow similar types of breakdowns of like a movie script, but I don't typically give a panel by panel breakdown. Instead, I do page by page, and I do very rough or loose. And sometimes I give a lot of extra creativity to my artist, but I try and inspire them. To, like, for instance, if I'm talking to Iwan on how the action I want for White Widow versus Artemis, I explain, her action is like this in these type of movies, and her action is more like this type of martial arts. Look, and I might provide links to YouTube to show examples. Again, this is a conversation between you and the artist. So you don't have to follow any set rules. The next is the last type of method is you can also do what's called co-plotting, and that's where either you work with another writer and collaborate, or you can work directly with the artist. I have done this where literally, rather than writing down descriptions and stuff, together we sat across from each other and did storyboards, just drew the storyboards. That's particularly effective when you don't have a lot of time. That was how we did, for instance, Robotech, the movie, when we had 2 weeks to do 2 complete issues, write, pencil, ink, and ship before the publisher was going to lose the rights. So we did not have time, so that's what we did. That's also actually had the original how quite often Stan Lee would do with Jack Kirby. Art process. I recommend this. Obviously, it varies a little bit depending upon what style, but when it comes to pencils, traditional, I'm a big believer in sketching. I would much rather get a very loose, even if it's stick figures, sketch or storyboard of how the page is going to look, and approve that before the artist spends or wastes any time going too far down the wrong path. It's a lot easier and a lot less stressful for an artist to correct it when it's just a rough sketch than it is if they've already completed it. Pencils then are when you commit that sketch to a more formalized and laid out page. Inks, if you're inking, sometimes a lot of times these days people will do what they call it's not rough pencils, but they'll do like final pencils, and they'll just scan it, darken it, and clean it up in the computer. So a lot of inking processes are kind of going by the wayside, but I'm a big fan of how beautiful and clean good inks can look. Colors, if you're doing colors, a color book, then it goes to that step, and whether it's painted digitally or not. And the color process, we're going to do a panel a bit more on that process at 2 o'clock today, or if you're watching this later, you can find it on YouTube or our live channel. Then it goes from there back to get lettered, and that's where I, as the writer, will provide the letterist a script, or I'll do it myself if I'm lettering, which I usually do. And that's putting the letters down, and then you format it for print from there. There is a specific size on your format. Just make sure whatever your final format is going to be, make sure you have it for that. Always, I should mention this on stuff, always scan in and work at higher resolution and size than your final format. That is incredibly important. You might end up using the artwork, for instance, in marketing, or you might end up using it again in a flashback later. So if you need to zoom in, also it allows you to make things look, when you shrink, things look tighter and cleaner. It's also just easier for every aspect. Do not, and I cannot stress this enough, do not work in RGB on your color. Print, if there's even a chance that eventually someday you will be wanting to print this, you need a high resolution file, and you need it to be in CMYK. RGB on your processes are for computer screens. CMYK is for print, and it is far better for it to be in print at CMYK, because you can always take from CMYK to RGB, but going the opposite direction can cause problems. Now you've got a book, you put it together. Where can you publish? Webtoons is probably by far the most popular. It's free. Now, you also have to be aware it's a pretty crowded place right now because it is the most popular. You got Comic Genesis, which gives you a bit more. It's free, free hosting, but it gives you a bit more flexibility. You've got places like keenspot.com that you can always apply to. It's just an example of a type of place. There are a lot of like conglomerates of web comics, for instance. I am a fan of web comics. You can do Comixology, for instance. They do have that option now, and there are a bunch of other apps out there that will allow you to publish through them. Basically, just Google or look around at things that you're looking at. And then, of course, you can always self-host. There are sites out there, that as long as they can use things like the WordPress sites. There's literally a plugin called Comic Press that you can, with very minimal work, update and create your own webcomic. Now, I do recommend doing the webcomic because it's important to have eyeballs, okay? But more importantly, it's a very low-cost way of you getting out there and getting experience. That's important. You don't want to jump to things too soon. So, for instance, you've got a webcomic up, you've created it. When do you start advertising? Well, honestly, don't advertise at all until you've got at least an entire issue or two completed. Okay. And I know that seems like a lot of work to do and nobody's seeing it, but the fact is, think of it from the other side. Do you want to sit there and go and see this comic and there's only a page up? You would go out there and you would see, which, by the way, that's one of the hallmarks of webcomics, is they consistently put up a page or so, like a week, a page every 2 weeks, a page every 2 days, whatever frequency you choose, as long as you're doing it consistently. Now, let's say you got a couple issues up, you're going to start advertising. There are listing sites you can do for free, and often they also have paid positions to get a bit more promotion. You can also do co-ops and link share type of things. There are a bunch of webcomic conglomerates that, there are superhero ones or slice of life ones. You can find other webcomics out there that are part of these collectives, and then you become listed in there. You've also got ad shares, places that do like the so-called free advertisements and stuff. If you put their ad links on your site, then you get that access. A really good method of advertising that we used is our guest comics. Okay. What that means is you either provide a page for somebody else who has a popular web comic, and it doesn't have to be one of the top, but you can do a guest comic on theirs, or vice versa. They can do one on yours, or you swap. Now, what does that do? What that does is it gets their audience to come find you, or your audience to go find them. That's the great thing with webcomics, especially, is you don't have competition. You only have peers. So it's a great thing to sit there and see who in your genre or those comics that are like yours that are out there, and try and work with them. Then, of course, you can do Facebook the free advertising through by creating forums and participating and things like that. And there is paid advertising. But again, the whole goal here is to spend as little as possible and slowly and surely build up your your audience, RSS feeds and things like that. So again, you're trying to build your audience. So the key here is consistency. You want to, if you're saying I'm going to update once a week, be sure to update once a week. If you're saying I'm doing it twice a week or once a month, no matter what your frequency, try to be consistent. Like I said before, networking is vital. It is something that, you're not trying to sell to or get readership out of your peers. You're trying to cross promote your audience with theirs and vice versa. Social media, again, is a great resource. You want to make sure, because this is audience driven, your audience is vitally important. Make sure that they know that. And the best way to do that is with social media, just like I'm literally doing right now. Make sure you have your RSS feeds working, your Facebook updates, your Twitter, your Instagrams, all of those things, those feeds are all connected. And that way your readers will know, okay, new page is up. Obviously, if you're very consistent, they're going to know that too. They're going to be like, yay, it's Sunday. I got a new page of Ogloff. And then obviously you can do conventions. Conventions are a great way, but that should be the last thing. Once you've really built up your audience and stuff online, then start looking offline. But that should be dead last. I see a lot of people try and jump into that first with, oh, I've got this ash can, and they go right into a convention, and then they wonder why they're spending all this money and not getting any audience or getting very few. And they're like, oh, I'm making connections, and not really. It's a big waste of time and money and effort, and it's typically only going to cause you to feel frustration. So please don't jump into the conventions too early. Now, you've got your comic, you've built up your audience. Now you want to start trying to monetize. And I'm talking about you've built up your audience to a point where you're consistently getting thousands of views. You don't need millions, but thousands is good. Now you can start getting, adding some advertisements on your page. Some of the hosts that you work with, for instance, may already have that. You can create your chain of ad networks, and try and build that up to where you're covering your costs. The ads and payouts for ads have gone much lower than they used to. That's because there's more being done with video than there is with static. But it is every bit counts. You hear in the background my 1.5-year-old. Sorry. You've also got sponsors. Sponsors are a potential, but again, unless you have a massive audience, it's not necessarily worth trying to reach out to them. You've got Patreon is fairly new. It's been around for a few years now. That's where you typically will offer something extra to the people who give you their patronage. I don't personally recommend putting your main content, your main story behind a Patreon wall. Instead, I'm a firm believer of giving as much as you can for free. but having Patreon as a method for people to give back, and you give them a little bit more. Maybe you do videos, maybe you give sketches, or things like that, or let them watch you draw. Those sorts of perks are great ways of getting some extra money on Patreon. Next, and this is after you've built, again, your audience. I cannot stress that enough. A lot of people I see make the mistake. They jump into getting a Kickstarter. Oh, I've done an issue and I've got 10 views a day. Let's go do a Kickstarter. Sorry, that's why they end up failing, and they get frustrated and they, quit. Build your audience, and once you've got a sufficient audience that you feel is willing to support you, next do a Kickstarter, do an Indigo, do a crowdfunding. White Widow was not a success on Kickstarter because of a fluke. It wasn't because we put it up there and people magically found it. You have to understand, White Widow became a massive success because I had spent decades and Jamie had spent years and years. I mean, literally, Jamie was, I think, going to like 40 conventions a year, building up his audience for his artwork. He had done covers for Zenoscope, IDW, Boom. He had built his audience. I had built my audience, and together our audiences were converted into Kickstarter consumers. So that is why. So no, there is no such thing as an overnight success. That is, everyone has to pay their dues. No matter how much you think something is an overnight success, I guarantee you there is a long story behind it. I've been at this for over 25 years. So anyone who says this is overnight, that is a really long night. But you've got Indiegogo, you've got Rocket Hub, you have so many crowdfunding opportunities now. So that's good. But remember, your audience is going to be important. Otherwise, you're going to fail. And also, when you do your Kickstarters and things like that, set your goals realistic but low. Also, make sure you don't go too low. For instance, I know a lot of people who didn't properly factor in their cost for shipping, their cost for production. Do your research, find out how much it is. You also have self-publishing as an option, obviously through Kickstarters or things like that. And another option is to join a publisher. So you want your comic out there in the world as a physical book. Now you've got something you can show a publisher. You can say, here is what I've done. Whether they're just printouts or what, you can email PDFs or what have you. But when you talk to publishers, whether it be us or Image or Boom or IDW or any of them, Antarctic Press, there are a lot of great publishers out there that do give opportunities to work with creators, but they want to see a finished product, not just an idea on a piece of paper with a title and maybe a fancy logo. That's not a book. Nobody pays for ideas. People pay for product. Now, that's kind of the overview. Again, these are things anyone can do. Feel free, if you have any questions on this or any other topics, you can reach out to me or through White Widow Comic at Gmail, or you can reach out on the White Widow Facebook page, or services at absolutecomics.net with any questions, comments, concerns about breaking in. Hopefully this was a very informative guide. Like I said, digitalwebbing.com is also a big resource that I highly recommend anyone wanting to break in. that is what they exist for. And Facebook has so many great forums and resources that you can use. So, hopefully this gives you guys a bit of a tutorial. So, all right. I thank you very much. Bye.